All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our new NACCID process webinar. Thank you everybody for joining today. Today we're going to talk about the new NACCID process and actually how to implement the new NACCID process within your ADRC. So appreciate you joining and let's get started. So first of all, the agenda for today is we're going to just do a quick welcome, and then we're going to do a process overview in case you haven't been part of any of the previous discussions or you didn't get a chance to participate in the pilot. We're going to talk about what the process, how this came to be, and what the timeline looks like. Then we're going to talk about when we get to the point of submitting your enrollment data to be able to generate NACCIDs, what that process is going to look like starting in the new year. Then we're going to have some of our ADRC partners go through and outline their implementation planning use cases. So they're going to talk about what they've been planning to, how they're planning to implement this, and how they're going to get this data collected and then submitted to NACC so that you get an idea of what that might look like if you are just starting your planning process. Then we're going to go through the resources for implementing this at your site. So what is NACC going to distribute and make available to you to help your ADRC get onboarded and support you through the process of changing the way that you collect and generate NACC IDs. And then we'll end with talking about next steps. So what resources are available to you now and what you can get started on now, as well as what will be coming up soon, and then when we will be going live. And we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. If you have questions throughout the program, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A box in Zoom here, and we'll get to them as we can. All right, so first of all, let's talk about the new NACCID process. So NACC is launching a new process for generating NACC IDs and enrolling participants. And the reason for this is really just to support this increase in multimodal data collection and sharing. And so the NACC ID, if you're not familiar with it or haven't seen it before, it looks like the sample one that's displayed on the screen. And this is the unique identifier that's tied to each participant within the NACC program to tie their data, no matter which modality it's in, to all into the same participant. So once a participant gets a NACC ID, that NACC ID follows that participant all the way through their participation in the study as well as beyond. And so it never changes. It always stays the same. Even if they transfer centers, they'll have the same NACC ID. And this will be the thing that ties in all the different genomics data, biomarker data, all of that will be tied together at NACC using the NACC ID. The NACC ID is a critical piece to tie all of these pieces, all these different multimodal data modalities into the NACC data platform. And so this figure is showing our NACC data platform, all of the expanded partner metadata and analysis data that's going to be tied into the NACC data platform, as well as our existing data streams like UDS, neuropathology, and the mixed MRI and PET. And all of those are going to be tied in and coming into NACC. And you'll be submitting some of this information and viewing this information in the ADRC portal. So you can see that kind of in the middle here in the NACC data platform. So within the NACC data platform, in the ADRC portal in specific, is where our ADRCs will be able to submit, view, audit, and access all of their participant data for your ADRC. And we're going to look at that in a little bit here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the NACC ID process. So how we're going to generate these NACC IDs now going forward, and then the timeline. So if this isn't something that you're familiar with, or if you are, we're going to just talk about what the process looks like now, the current process for assigning NACC IDs. And I'm going to refer to this as the old process, even though it's now. And then going forward, we'll talk about what the new process is. So right now, ADRCs consent a participant to be a part of the study and then submits or completes the initial UDS visit, right? So you go through and you collect all the data on the forms, and then the ADRCs complete that packet and submit it to NACC. using the current portal that's available. And then once that packet becomes finalized is when participants receive that NACCID. And so it exists, it's just less visible than it will be with the new process. So once that packet is finalized and the submission is complete, that's when the NACCID is available now. And so that NACCID is still there. It's still the unique identifier that ties all the participants to all of their different multimodal data streams. And the change that you're going to see with the new process is that ADRCs will still start by consenting the participant to be part of the study. And then the very next step after consent is that the ADRC will submit the new NACCID assignment form. So this will be the form that enrolls that participant into the NACC study, and then they'll be able to have that NACCID available immediately, and it will still follow them throughout the entire duration of their participation in the study and beyond. But it will just be more visible and it will be available sooner. NACC will assign those NACCIDs immediately to those participants upon receiving that form or that data submission. And then from there, ADRCs will continue on from their process of, completing the initial UDS packet, collecting any other information that you do throughout the visit, and then submitting the UDS packet to NACC using the new ADRC portal. So the rest of the process will continue on similarly. It's just that the NACCID comes earlier within the process. And the who gets a NACCID still remains the same. It's the UDS and BDS participants. So anybody who's participating and planning to submit data will still receive a NACCID, just like they do now. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline. So we have announced this a year ago, and we have done some development and testing. NACC conducted a pilot. Several ADRCs participated. Many of them participated in the pilot and provided feedback. NACC made some adjustments to this process that we'll go through today, and some changes based on the feedback. And so today we're on in the red box here, we're on the informational webinar day. We're finalizing the documentation, and that will be available to you to begin preparing to submit these forms and the data for the new NACCID process. And then we're entering the preparation and training time where you'll be able to do all of your on-site training and testing. And then we will go launch this live on the beginning of the new year. So right after the new year, we'll start making this process will be required for NACCID and enrollment generation. And so you'll have all of the tools and resources available, so you'll be able to participate starting now. All right, so this does represent a change in the workflow locally at your ADRC. So we wanted to just go through and kind of walk through the steps of how this might look going forward within your center. And thanks to Chad Murchison, who helped launch this workflow and help us get started with outlining this. So the way that this is going to look is you'll start with your initial contact with your participant, just like you do now. And you will collect their basic information, same as you do now. Whatever you do at your center will remain the same. And then when it comes to any participants that will have UDS data collected, if you're planning on collecting them, if they've consented to that study, whether it's a clinical core or affiliated study, that participant will consent to NACC or the affiliated studies, and then you'll generate your local PTID just like you do now. Nothing will change about that. This doesn't change any of that process of how you are tracking them locally using your own site ID or PTID. Then for new ADRC participants or transfer participants, you will prepare a NACCID submission. So this form that we have, or the data, if you're collecting that data, you'll verify their status of whether they're a new participant or a transfer participant, and then enter the relevant information into either your local, we'll talk about the submission methods in a minute here, but whether it's a local system or a NACC hosted system, some basic contact information. So just general information to identify them as a participant, and if they're a transfer, where they're transferring from. So it's a very short form. that will identify them and provide enough details for NACC to be able to check their details and either create a new NACC ID or transfer them to your center from a previous center. All right, and throughout this, in order to, just check, make sure NACC will be tracking implementation progress through these ways. We'll be tracking NACC ID formation for each ADRC. Will be tracking and reporting NACC IDs, just making sure that everybody is able to access the new process and generate NACC IDs using that process or transfer participants to their ADRC. So NACC will be tracking on that side. And then once UDSV4 starts being collected and submitted to NACC, those packets will not be accepted without a NACC ID being generated. So it's super important to start generating those NACC IDs at the time of consent so that when we start submitting UDSV4 packets, those packets are able to go through and be finalized because the NACC ID is created. All right, so let's talk about what it's going to look like to submit these enrollment NACC ID forms. If you hadn't gotten a chance to participate in the pilot previously, this might be your first look at this new process. So I wanted to show you what some of the screens look like, as well as the different collection and submission methods. My slide is stuck. So one moment here. There we go. All right, so for collecting data using the new ADRC portal, you're still going to have a lot of the same options that you did before. So you'll be able to collect using an electronic data capture and submission system. So you'll be able to collect using your local REDCap if you're using REDCap locally, or your alternative local EDC. So if you have your own EDC, you're able to still use the same short form, the same fields, and be able to collect and submit data that way. You also will have a PDF available, so you're able to collect the information on a PDF and submit it using a CSV that way. And you're also able to use direct entry into NACC's hosted REDCap. So this is a newly available system where you're able to, through the ADRC portal, you'll be able to log into a NACC hosted REDCap system. So if you don't have REDCap or you don't want to set up this form locally, you're able to just enter the information for enrollment or generating new NACC IDs or transferring a participant to your site right into a hosted REDCap system that's generally available. This will be available for every ADRC. So if you wanted to use it, it's available to you. So no matter which collection method you use to collect the basic field information for generating NACC IDs, you'll submit it either through a CSV, or if it's direct entry, it'll just go straight into the NACC data platform. So the submission options are you can submit via CSV programmatically using an API or CLI. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit here. You can also bulk upload just like you always have using a CSV upload. And this is kind of important for this particular process to do on a pretty frequent basis, just because we do want to keep that as close to the consent date as possible. And then you can also, if you use that NACC hosted REDCap, the submission to the data platform will be automatic. So once you submit the form into REDCap and click complete, then it will go into the NACC data platform as part of a programmatic process. All right, so those are our options for collecting and submitting data into the NACC data platform for this process. The other thing I wanted to make sure that you saw, if you hadn't been part of the previous demos or the pilot, is what the ADRC portal is actually going to look like. So this is really similar to what the ADRC portal looks like. This is available now, you can see it. But for this process, for the NACCID process, you're going to go to the Manage Participants button, and that's where you're going to have access to see all of those different submission methods. And newly available, if you did participate in the pilot, now we have a single sign-on that will log you into both the NACC-hosted REDCap as well as the ADRC portal. So you've probably been seeing emails about getting your logins updated, and that's to facilitate this login to both the NACC-hosted REDCap as well as the ADRC portal. So these are some of the screens. I just wanted to show you what some of the screens will look like once you get into the ADRC portal and you start working with your NACCIDs. And so these are things that have been available either in the pilot or have been updated since the pilot. So I just wanted to go through and show you each of these so that you can see what you're going to see. So this is sample data, but this is what the screen looks like where your participant identifiers, so where those NACCIDs will be available once you start generating them through the ADRC portal, right? So you'll have this table view where you have different columns of information. Anything that you've uploaded or entered will be available here. You'll be able to sort by any of these columns. You can also download this table, and you will be able to retrieve this programmatically as well if you don't want to log in and see it. But you'll be able to download it or get it automatically. And then you can also click to view your uploads, which I'll show in a second here. All right, so now within the ADRC portal, this is new since the pilot, and this was based on some of the feedback that we got from the NACCID pilot. We have a data submission dashboard. And what this will show you is you'll be able to see your kind of overview of all of the files that you've uploaded, which will show you kind of the name, any QC information that you need to know at a glance. Any of those will show a pop-up if you click on any of the blue fail buttons. And then you can see the upload date and who uploaded each one of those. You can also, from this dashboard, go to the full errors and alerts report, which I'll show you in a minute here, but it's easy to get there and back. You also have access to the quick links, which are some of the most frequently used links from this page. So it'll take you to, if you want to enter additional NACCIDs or go to the ADRC portal community forum and ask a question. You're also able to go over to that identifiers table, which I showed just a minute ago. And then a quick link to some helpful documentation. So this is our step-by-step documentation on how to correct errors and alerts. So you're able to get this directly from the submission dashboard, which is another piece of, or another feature that was requested through the NACCID pilot. All right, so this is our data submission dashboard, and this is what will pop up after you submit data within the ADRC portal for the NACCID. All right, this is the errors and alerts page. This is new for the ADRC portal within the new NACC data platform, so I just wanted to make sure you all got a chance to see this. So this is showing all of your errors and alerts from any uploads that you do into the portal. And you can see a quick preview of how many errors, alerts, and files are being reported on. You're also able to use the search box to search through for any specific errors and alerts that you want to look for. There's also a download button, so you can download and work with this data separately in your local system if you'd like to do that. And then any of the columns that are displayed on this page, you're able to sort by and see them in different orders if you like. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about.
Yes. We did have a couple of questions come in. Do you want to take those now or
yeah, we can look at them. Sure.
Yeah, first one was back on slide 14 where you were talking about let's see. That is a slow loading slide. Where you were talking about collecting and submitting enrollment information for the NACCID. Christopher Barnes asked, will the upload API allow us to get the new NACCIDs back that we just created?
Okay. Yes, that the NACCIDs will be available for retrieval through the API or through programmatic request. Yes.
Okay, great. And then Sylvia Grant asked, is Rave and REDCap entry needed?
I'm not sure what RAVE is. I'm not sure if there's anybody else from NAC who might be able to answer that in the chat, but otherwise that might have to be a follow-up. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. And then lastly, will this process be available for participants that are not enrolled in both ADRC and leads, but just leads?
My understanding is that yes, affiliated studies will be able to submit enrollment forms for to generate NACCIDs. Sorry. Yes.
Great, thank you.
That is something too. If you're here and you're part of an affiliated studies or one of our affiliated studies, I know that we have meetings set up to be able to facilitate the transition into UDSP4. This is some of this NACCID process is one of the things that we're going to discuss as well with you to make sure that we have your needs for that as well and are accounting for that. So watch for communications from the project manager on getting that information and making sure that we are communicating about that. That will be coming up, and that will be coming shortly. So definitely get that meeting.
And then we have one final question before going forward. Nicole asks, will participants that have a BDS prior to the go live need to have a NACCID created in this new way?
So anybody who's currently part of the, who currently already is enrolled already has a NACCID. So even if you haven't seen it because it's kind of happened behind the scenes, if they have a NACCID already and they've already been a participant, they don't need to have a NACCID generated this way because they already have one. If you have more specific questions or you have a participant you're not sure about, definitely send it into the help email that I'll show at the end here, and we can double check. But they shouldn't need a separate additional NACCID generated.
Great, thank you.
Great. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is something that was highly anticipated with the launch of the new NAC data platform, which is the ability to submit and retrieve information from the data platform using programmatic methods. And so we have our tech team, NAC's tech team, has generated a number of different documentation options for this programmatic exchange of information. So I wanted to just kind of show you what's available so that you can see and start using and testing this if this is something that's of interest to your site. So we started out with programmatic upload information posted on our EDC docs website. So we have information on how to submit data using the API or the CLI or ACLI into our NAC data platform. So that was existing during the pilot. Based on pilot feedback and requests from pilot participants, we also, our tech team has also expanded the documentation that's available to include several demos of information or of how to generate the code needed to be able to submit and pull data from the NAC data platform. So you'll see an additional resource on the website that will show all of these demos using different types of languages, as well as different methods that you might want to use in order to push and pull information. So you can see, Miss Chris, there you go. I think that might be what you're looking for.
Yeah,
So
type of question, is that available now from the website? Can we get
it
a
is
link?
available. Yeah. Yes, I can get, I don't know if there's somebody from NAC who can pull that link really quick, but I can definitely get it for you before the end of the webinar for sure. Okay, and if you are using REDCap locally and that's how you want to be able to, how you want to be able to interact with this process going forward as well, that's absolutely still available for the NACCID process, just like it is for the UDS packet data collection. And we will have the same resources available that we're planning to launch for UDSV4. So for the NACCID enrollment form, you'll also have a REDCap XML file or a REDCap zip file that you will be able to import into your local REDCap system to be able to use the same REDCap form that NACC is using on our hosted REDCap. So it should be pretty quick and easy. The form is pretty short anyway, but even easier to be able to set it up locally. All right, we're going to take a break from me for a minute, and we're going to shift over to hearing from some of our ADRC partners on how they're planning to implement this at their local sites. So you can kind of see what they've thought through and what some of the decisions that they've made on how they're going to implement this. And so I'm going to turn it over to Chad Murchison from University of Alabama Birmingham ADRC to explain his plan.
Thanks, Chad. Okay, so this, not too surprisingly, is very similar to the overall workflow that Jess had presented earlier for how we're planning to do this overall implementation within UAB. So I've broken it down here into two aspects. We have what I'm kind of referring to as the pre-submission period, which is the time period that's happening. Yes, I'm sitting here trying to move my mouse and realizing nobody can actually see this. So thank you, Jess. The pre-submission period, which is pretty much all the things that we're trying to take into account prior to actually engaging with the system that Jess has just described up to this point. This is distinct from the actual submission workflow, which is what we see in the lower half. I think it's really important to kind of draw distinctions between those two because it really dictates how we want to be engaging with the data and with the participant as we get this mapping of the NACCID. So I've tried to break this down for ways that we have kind of indicated that the ADRC's clinical core is going to be engaged. And by that, I mean our clinical coordinating staff, the people who really kind of sit there and engage directly with the participant during the consenting process, as well as the roles that are being played by our data management and statistical core, and who are actually kind of doing the more digital aspects, including the submission itself in most cases. So for the pre-submission, we can think about the initial contact that's being done. So these are going to be our community outreach, our clinical referrals, our self-referrals, things like that. Just anybody who has expressed an interest in the ADRC as an entity. At this point, our clinical core, or possibly our outreach core, are going to sit here and actually get initial data collection, mainly with respect to our registry, which we know is a new requirement for all ADRCs to have that study-ready registry. Once that's done and we actually have somebody in the registry, we kind of need to draw a distinction between people who are going to be used just for informational or educational purposes. But for our roles here, we're identifying people who are engaged with research. At this point, this is where we need to kind of get to the point that Stephanie had mentioned in chat, which is kind of distinguishing between the prototypical clinical cohort that is getting the full UDS battery and those that are going to be kind of UDS adjacent, so to speak. In particular, we want to be focusing on people who are going to be collecting UDS data with the expectation that that will be submitted in some way, shape, or form to NACC. We know there are plenty of studies that do queries from NACC data in this case. And so we can anticipate that even though these people wouldn't be a clinical cohort participant per se, they are going to have UDS data that is part of the UDS universe. Once those have been identified from here, we can actually get them consented, and we have any sort of expanded data with respect to the research registry being collected. And at this point, we have now identified somebody that can get a PTID or a participant level identity within our ADRC in particular. At this point, we now have somebody who is a research registry participant, and now we can actually see what we want to be doing for the submission process itself. In particular, we think this is an excellent point to identify someone who is going to be a new ADRC participant or someone that we're inheriting from another ADRC. So we're down here in Birmingham, we're really close to Georgia. So on occasion, we've gotten a couple of people who used to be over at Emory's ADRC, and we want to make sure to be able to identify them as well. So at this point, we get any additional electronic data capture necessary for the NACCID, which goes to that demographic footprint that Jess had talked about earlier. So things like gender identification, years of education, things like that. So at this point, the pre-submission period is done, and we can actually think about the workflow itself. At this point, we want to make sure internally that we have a PTID that is ready to go, the NACC status has been verified, and we have all the information that we need in order to continue to engage with this participant at the registry level. At this point, we actually get a split, and we decided this was the best way to really kind of think about this. If someone is a transfer, it's really kind of a one-off situation. It's not necessarily somebody that we are bringing in on a regular basis. And this is unique enough where we can actually follow the top flow, where we're actually having our clinical core do the necessary data pulls and actually just doing a direct upload to the NACC REDCap system. It just winds up being that kind of one-off. And in these scenarios, that kind of direct engagement is a good way just to make sure that we're actually following this as well as we can, because we need to start to think about things like the individual site IDs, things like that, and making sure that that has human eyes on it is something that we feel is very important. Conversely, if we have a NACC ID, we don't necessarily need them right that minute to be engaged with the system. You know, after all, these visits take about 4 hours, right? So instead, what we've decided to do is an auto batch approach where we get all of the IDs for the participants that we have consented on any given day. And then at that stage, we can actually make a choice. We can either generate a CSV for direct upload following the methods just described, or we can do the aforementioned API call. We're planning on beginning with the CSV generation simply because we know it's a little easier to work with. It allows us to, again, have a bit of human curation on it, but ultimately we would like to transition out to the API call. Regardless of which of these three methods we do, we know it's all going to the NACC data submission system right there in the middle. Once this is done, assuming that we have any appropriate error kickbacks resolved or things like that, we are actually able to receive the NACC ID, and now we enter it into our system itself. So now we have that NACC ID. It is associated with our registry participant for research, whether it's clinical cohort or not. And then from there, we can just distribute it and just impress everybody with how well we've actually used the NACC ID system.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna hear from one other ADRC member. We're gonna hear from Debbie Zemlock from Northwestern ADRC. There we go.
Hey everyone,
Thanks, Debbie.
thanks Jess. So yeah, Northwestern's proposed plan is going to be similar to what Chad just presented as well. I am just starting with consent here. Just like Chad, I think we assign PTIDs after consent. So consent happens with the clinical core. So here I have a just pretty simplified 3-step process of clinical core who consents the participant in and enters that little bit of demographic information needed to submit the NACC ID form into our Northwestern REDCap database. And then step 2 is where the data core comes in. So I'm thinking about, we're going to have like a weekly process where we take all of the people that have been consented over the last week and via an R script, just export that through the API from our personal, our local REDCap instance, export that through the API, and then directly just go ahead and import that into Flywheel, also using the API. Like Chad mentioned, this will not be super automated at first. We will want to check everything that we submit into Flywheel to make sure everything is working well, and do a lot of testing beforehand. But the hope is that this will be a fully automated process where we just have to click a button and it is done. And then that goes from Flywheel. NACC will create the NACC ID, and like Chris was mentioning, hopefully that is a very automated process to where once we are running that script to give NACC the information needed to generate that NACC ID, hopefully the end result of that script can then just be us getting back the NACC ID and then directly, again, via API, adding that back into our local instance so that that is now available for all other cores in REDCap. And I don't have anything about transferring here. I think that happens. I think it's only happened like maybe once tops per year. So that will definitely just be a fully manual process to where we will be submitting that directly into the NACC instance of their REDCap, just to make sure that whole process goes smoothly. So yeah, that's everything.
Great. Thanks so much, Debbie. I think we may have a couple of questions that came up during your use cases. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Hannah's tracking those.
Yeah, so our first question is from Monica. Monica asks, will NACC send out announcements when the local REDCap software should be updated, or how will they be notified about that?
Oh, I think that's a NACC question. So yes, so NACC will make an announcement once the final resources are posted on our website. And so that will be distributed to everybody. I'm anticipating the beginning of December. And so that's when those resources will be available for download and creating into your local REDCap system or your local EDC. If and when there are updates, we will absolutely send those out as well. So an announcement will go out. We'll probably also post it in the ADRC program community forum so that people can see it there as well.
Stephanie Tran asks, what email address should we reach out to in order to confirm NACCIDs for our participants? Is it something they have to reach out via email, or can they see it in a portal?
I believe that that's something that they will just be able to see in the portal. So is the question just where to get NACCIDs, or?
Where to confirm the NACCIDs for participants?
Oh yeah, so that will be within the ADRC portal. They'll be available right there. If you have any technical issues where something's not showing up that you think should, or you uploaded a file and you don't see it, that's something that you can email about. But just to be able to see the NACCIDs or retrieve them, that will be available in the new ADRC portal.
Great. Let's see, we've also got a question from Ashley Wilson about the sandbox and whether the Flywheel environment sandbox is available for testing out web API calls now.
Yes, the NACCID sandbox, or sorry, the NACC data platform sandbox is available now and will be going forward.
Great. And then it looks like someone asked for the link to the NACCID API document that was shared in the chat for those who haven't seen it yet. And then we'll take one more question before continuing with the presentation and save some other questions for the end. Let's see. So Frida asks, when will we see the NACCID for images already acquired but waiting for upload?
NACCID for images already acquired but waiting for upload. So the NACCID should be generated going forward and after the first of the year, right when a participant gets consented. So wherever that participant gets consented, that organization can submit an enrollment form. So you should be able to see those NACCIDs as long as the participant has been consented. So presumably images that have been collected, if they are for somebody who has already been consented, that NACCID will be available in the ADRC portal already. Hopefully that answers. If that's not what your question was, please go ahead and post a clarification. Anything else?
We do have some more questions. I just don't know how many you want to take now or continue on with the presentation, as some might be answered.
Okay, yeah, we're going to get into resources and timeline in a little bit. So yeah, some of them might be answered and we will go get the rest at the end. Thank you so much, Chad and Debbie, for presenting. I think that was super helpful for people to see what it might look like and kind of talk through some of the decisions that will have to be made on workflow locally. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, okay, so how are you going to implement this at your site? So what resources are going to be available if you haven't seen any from the pilot? This is all going to be new. But what NACC is providing for resources, and this will be available again at the beginning of December, right on NACC's website. We'll have all of these resources available in a single location, so it's super easy to access all of them. But the first thing we're going to have is just make sure that you have step-by-step instructions on how to use the submission site and the data collection. So we'll have detailed documentation and with screenshots on how to, how to go through all this new process, because it is a new interface as well as a new NACCID generation process. So we want to make sure that you have all of the information on how to use all the different pieces. So that'll be available on our website. The other thing that you'll have is SOPs on setting up your local REDCap system, right? So we'll have those XML and zip files available for you to use to set up your local REDCap if you do use REDCap. And we'll also have that documentation on programmatic upload and how to use that as well. And so that will be available as part of those collected resources right on our website as well. You will have access to a sandbox environment to test those submissions. That's available on the NACC data platform, as we had just talked about. You'll also have access to something new that was piloted during the pilot, but it's going to be available to the entire ADRC program, is the ADRC program community forum. This is a moderated forum hosted by NACC on Discourse. And this is somewhere where you can go in and you can post questions for NACC or for each other. You can share resources, you can share tips and tricks, and just connect with each other as well as connect with NACC. NACC moderates this with our tech team as well as our research team, so we're able to address a large variety of questions. And this is monitored every day. And so usually turnaround time is pretty quick. You can see all of the information will be available there that other people have posted and asked. So there should be a just growing wealth of information. If you go there soon, within the next week or two, you should be receiving, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but you'll be able to log in and see all of the posts that were part of the pilot already. So questions that were answered during the initial phases of talking about how this NACCID process was going to be rolled out, as well as future, anything that comes up during the actual implementation. So NACC will be also posting information into the community forum. So when we get Q&A like this, where some of these questions are things that a lot of people will be having the same question, we're going to post those onto the forum. Anything that we get from support, we'll be posting onto the forum as well. So if it's generally applicable information or questions that we get a lot about, where's this API documentation, we'll make sure we put it there as well, so that people who are looking for information or have a specific question that keeps coming up, it should be there for easy access. So that is something that we're really excited about to see and implement as part of this process. And then of course there's the email, so if you're stuck or if you're struggling with something or something's not working the way you expect it to, we have a dedicated email that our tech team will be monitoring for any kind of technical support throughout this process. So you don't feel stuck and you can keep kind of moving forward. All right, so we're almost there. We're going to talk about next steps. Right, so we saw this a little bit earlier, but the next steps are going to be reviewing that documentation, just getting your site ready, training everybody on what your process is going to look like and how to use it, and then being able to go live and get your NACC IDs for your newly consented participants. All right, so what can you do now? So right now, you can make sure that you're authorized to access the NACC data platform, and that is controlled through the NACC directory. So this is something that your administrator can set you up with. So if you're in the NACC directory, it's just assigning the permissions to be able to access the NACC data platform. And so this is something that you can do now. You can log in and see the ADRC portal and start clicking around and becoming familiar with the interfaces. And then within the next, unless you are a participant in the pilot, the Discourse or the ADRC Community Program Forum isn't available now, but it will be within the next week or two. And that's something you can get into and start exploring and getting ready for in advance of the go live date. So you definitely want to do that. And then once you get access to the NACC data platform, you can log into the ADRC portal now. In December, which is not very far away right now, is you can begin your training and testing for within the portal, and you'll have all of the documentation, the supporting files for setting up your local REDCap or example files of the CSV that you can start using, as well as those instructions. And then within when the new year comes, you'll be able to start using this process for newly consented participants. And this will be a required process. So this is super important to start, incorporating this and getting used to it and being able to submit this information, because after the first of the year, participants need to be getting their NACC IDs assigned or getting transferred to your site initially right after consent. I just wanted to show you this because I know you all get a ton of emails, and I wanted to make sure you saw what the Discourse Forum invite is going to look like so that you can get into that ADRC Community Program Forum. So we want to make sure that see this. It's going to come from nacforum@uw.edu. It looks kind of simple, so all you have to do is click on the link there so that you're able to register and then start engaging with both NACC and your ADRC colleagues. Last but not least, the support along the way, right? I just wanted to put this in a single spot so you have easy access to the technical support email, the NACC ID webpage. So this is where all of those resources will be collected and easily accessible for you, as well as the link to that ADRC program community forum so that you have that when you have a question or want to post a resource or see what other people are up to. Here's my email if you have any questions along the way or want any direct links to resources provided to you. There's my email. Feel free to connect with me anytime. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any other questions that people have had that we haven't gotten to, and see what else we have before the end, if anything.
Okay, yes, we do have a couple more questions. So the first question is from Alok. He says, I'm not sure if this was mentioned somewhere and I didn't see it, but if someone drops from the study in between the evaluation and we don't have complete NACC data, is the expectation that the ID will be left there? Or is the expectation a milestone form documenting that data is incomplete?
I'm not sure about the milestone form. That might be a research team question, but the NACC ID will remain with that participant forever, and it will never be reused or allocated to a different participant. So once a NACC ID is assigned to someone, even if they don't complete their initial visit, that if they ever come back, they'll still have the same NACC ID.
Right. And then if anyone else from the NACC team is on the webinar and has the access link for the sandbox, someone's asking for that to be popped into the chat. And then Jimmy asks, will UDSB3 participants need to use the new NACC ID process starting January 1st?
So the hope is that any participants who are consented will have the NACC ID as close as possible to their consent. And so if you have people who have visits in process, you can certainly submit those forms for participants who don't have a NACC ID yet. And that's definitely encouraged as well. I know some of our partners would really appreciate it if all of our participants who are currently in process had NACC IDs sooner rather than later. So definitely go for it.
Okay, and then Shelly asks, can any of our clinicians be connected to Discourse? And if so, how do we or they request it?
So anybody who is part of the NACC directory and has access to the NACC directory, there's a selection for participation in the forum. So any administrators who are adding people for their ADRC to the NACC directory, they would be able to add whoever they would normally add. So yeah.
And I believe that's going live at a later date. It's not currently available to those folks, correct?
So that will be, yeah, my understanding is that will be within the next week, is that mass invite of everybody who's been currently authorized to access the directory. And a lot of that's been part of these kind of login updates that you've been getting will be able to, or the mass invite will go out within a week. And then going forward, every time an administrator adds somebody with those permissions, they'll individually receive an invite to the discourse forum.
Great. Okay, and then Karen Smith from UCSF asks, non-English speakers will not be transitioning to UDS v4 for a while. So will we be submitting NACC data on UDS 3 and will that impact this NACCID process?
So that should not impact the NACCID process. That should stay this, you should still be able to submit those new NACCID enrollments or a NACCID transfer for any participants who are using any version of the UDS.
Great. And then it looks like we got some elaboration on a previous question from Sylvia Grant regarding the RAVE. So their center typically enters data into a program called Medida RAVE. Will they now need to enter data into REDCap as well?
Okay, so I'm gonna make a guess that Medida RAVE is a local EDC where you collect maybe UDS data or your study data, and then you submit it to NACC via an uploaded file at this point. And so if that's the case, then the answer is no, you don't need to reduplicate that information into REDCap. Data can be submitted, whether it's NACCID data or UDS data, into the new data platform using a CSV, right? So you can export from your local EDC, whether it's Medida RAVE or if you have some other local EDC that you use that's non-REDCap, you can export to a CSV or create a CSV however you normally would, and then upload that either programmatically or through the ADRC portal. And it doesn't have to go through REDCap. Many of our ADRCs are using REDCap, and so that is something that NACC has been providing consolidated resources around, because we also have our hosted REDCap system, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, it looks like Medidata RAVE is a commercial EDC many sites use for clinical trials. So thanks for putting that link in the chat, Karen. Okay, and then it looks like we also have an update from Elise Gruber, who is a NACC project manager in the chat. Elise says that the ADRC community forum on Discourse will have the same core groups that we use in the NACC directory. And when you accept your invitation to join Discourse, the community forum, you'll be added to the appropriate group core for the forum. So clinicians in the clinical core in the NACC directory will be added to that forum group.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Elise.
Just piggybacking off of that, is there a NACCID group or anywhere that people can see questions about the NACCID within the forum?
Yeah, so in the forum, there will be different groups for the types of users, but there will also be tags. That's how the forum kind of designates the subject or kind of core idea around a post. And so we have tags already set up within the forum, and I imagine this will grow as the forum continues to mature. So there is a NACCID category and tags. There's also UDS v4 category and tags, and there are other kind of associated common themes that you'll be able to see. And that way you can easily sort information or go to different categories and see only relevant to what you might be looking for in that particular visit.
Wonderful. Okay, if there are any more questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat now. Otherwise, I think we're ready to move forward.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, what we're going to do is we will distribute the recording for this as well as the PowerPoint slides, and then look for an email with a link to our updated NACCID website around the beginning of December that will have all of our finalized training materials, and make sure that you get access to and accept that invite to the ADRC Program Community Forum in the interim, and feel free to get into the portal as well, the ADRC portal, and start exploring.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. Great job. And thank you to
Thanks.
Chad and Debbie too.
Yeah, thanks to our presenters. Thanks everybody for coming, and we look forward to implementing this together.